Today we are exactly 60 days ahead of Brexit date. We've had 18 months of very intense, very difficult negotiations. And we have, at the end of these negotiations, on the table a package which consists of a withdrawal agreement, which creates certainty where Brexit has created uncertainty, in particular on citizens' rights, for those citizens that have exercised their freedom of movement rights, on the settling of financial obligations arising from EU membership, both ways. This is not unilateral. This is also about EU obligations to the UK. The land border, the only land border in the future between the EU and the UK, which is on the island of Ireland, and where both sides are committed to preserving the Good Friday Agreement and the achievements of the peace process. The UK will never be a partner like any other. The UK will continue to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It is a necessary partner to strengthen the rules-based multilateral system, which is under heavy attack at the moment. So the EU has said from the beginning, we want to have as close a relationship as possible with the UK in the future. But the limits to that ambition depend on how close the UK wants to be involved with the EU and what is the balance of rights and obligations it is willing to accept. So that is the package that we have negotiated with the UK. It was endorsed by 27 heads of state and government and jointly endorsed with Prime Minister May after she had gotten the agreement of her cabinet. That's what happened on the 25th of November. And since then, it's been downhill. While there has been and there continues to be full ownership for the result of this negotiation on the EU side, we have to take note of the fact that on the UK side there is no ownership of the result of this negotiation. So we are moving forward on our side with the ratification of this package, but obviously that is not what we are seeing on the UK side. So now I'm venturing into our reading of the situation in London, looking forward to hearing from people who are closer to that discussion how they see the situation. So there's no point beating about the bush. The withdrawal agreement was defeated with a 2/3 majority in the House of Commons. That is a crushing defeat by any standards. What we saw was 432 MPs voting against, 202 in favour, and the 432 seem to have voted against for very different reasons. It obviously includes opposition MPs who want to be the alternative to the government, as is the job of an opposition. You have those who prefer to get out of the EU with no deal, so to really have a hard crash out. But there are also those who want no Brexit, and those who said the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration are a blind Brexit. We want to have more clarity about the destination. And then, of course, you have also unionists who dislike the backstop. But what I'm getting at is it is quite a challenge to see how you can construct out of the diversity of opposition a positive majority for a deal. And that is now the task of the UK government and of the House of Commons. And we have to give them the time to do that, even though we have to recognize that time is limited because we are on an automatic course towards Brexit, with or without a deal, on the 29th of March, so in 60 days. And we need to have a majority which does not just get the withdrawal agreement over the hurdle of the meaningful vote by a narrow margin, but we need to have a stable majority which is there to ensure the ratification, but also all the internal legislation that the UK will have to do. So that is quite a big challenge. And the negotiation on this is in London. There's no negotiation between the EU and the UK. That negotiation is finished. We are not going to reopen the withdrawal agreement. That has been said time and again by leaders. I'm not giving you any news here. And the result of the negotiation that is there has been very much shaped by the UK negotiators, much more than they actually get credit for. For me, this is a bit like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Because if you look notably at one of the most contested elements of the withdrawal agreement, the famous backstop, the design was very much shaped by the UK. You can do a simple comparison yourself. Look at what the Commission, the EU, had proposed in the beginning of 2018, and look at what is in the withdrawal agreement. And you will see the influence of the UK on the design of the backstop. In particular, and the most contested element inside the EU, we have now a UK-wide customs union as part of the backstop. That was the explicit demand of the UK. And when we got to that point, we were reassured that this is not only a necessary but a sufficient condition for the ratification of the withdrawal agreement. There are now ideas floating around again, and it does feel like Groundhog Day, about a time limit to the backstop or a unilateral exit clause from the backstop. Let me just reassure you, none of this is new. All of this has been extensively discussed at the negotiating table amongst the 27, no later than the European Council in December, where all 27 heads of state and government and the leaders of the EU institutions were unanimous that a time limit to the backstop defeats the purpose of the backstop. Because it would mean that once the backstop would expire, you stand there without any solution for this border issue, which is much more important than just trading goods, which is about people living on this border, trading, living, studying, working, having their family life across this border as if it didn't exist. And we cannot afford to have a situation where we do not have a result to this challenge. Where we do have margin is on the political declaration. And here I'd be interested to hear from our UK observers. Our impression from here is that the discussion in London at the moment is much more about the future of the country and the future of the EU-UK relationship than it is just about the content of the withdrawal agreement. In fact, a lot of the discussion is uninhibited by any knowledge of what is actually in the withdrawal agreement. So the current draft of the political declaration is a reflection of the red lines of both sides. It allows for a range of outcomes. First of all, the idea of a unilateral escape route, of a time limit, these were discussed during weeks and nights and weekends. What you find is Article 20 of the Protocol on Ireland, which foresees a process to try and agree on a way out of the backstop. And that is also where I disagree. The backstop is not the precondition for the future relationship. It is not. The backstop is not the future relationship. It would be a very, as the leaders have said, suboptimal future relationship. It is not what the EU wants. It is, however, the only operational way we have found to preserve the benefits, the realizations of the Good Friday Agreement. There are ways out of it. And Tony referred to the famous paragraph 49 of the joint report of December 2017, Solutions A, B, and C, where indeed one of the ways out is the future relationship. But as the Commission said in its communication of December 2017 accompanying the joint report, it is difficult to see how the future relationship can take care of the Irish border issue, given that the UK has not only decided to leave the EU, but also the single market and the customs union. And there is no way around the fact that between two different customs territories, two different regulatory spaces, two different legal systems, you do have checks and controls. Solution B was dubbed maximum facilitation, alias MaxFac, artificial intelligence on the border, etc. We said, well, you know, we are willing to use all facilitative arrangements, etc., that exist, but technological solutions are not enough to do away with the border. We looked at every border on this earth, every border that the EU has with a third country. There is simply no way that you can do away with checks and controls. But what we did say is, well, we should not prevent ourselves from getting more intelligent collectively. And we've always said, we are not wedded to our backstop. When we proposed it, we said, we find we have a duty to translate our joint commitment of the joint report into a legally operative text, but we are open to any alternative suggestions from the UK. The problem is there weren't any. The only proposal that came was a temporary customs arrangement in June 2017, which then found its way to a certain extent into the all-UK customs union part of the backstop. So that was a British proposal. By the way, it was also the Brits who introduced into the discussion the notion of a temporary nature of the backstop without a time limit, because that's exactly what the temporary customs arrangement did. It's an unless and until provision. It's not time limited, but it is event limited. And then we said, we are open to alternative arrangements. So if you look at the text now of the withdrawal agreement, of the backstop, you see that one of the ways out is alternative arrangements, because we have the shared ambition to put the border solution on a permanent basis with alternative arrangements. So the problem with the Brady Amendment is it doesn't spell out what alternative arrangements are. We haven't found them, and the UK negotiators have not been able to explain to us. And that's no criticism of them, because they don't exist. So I think we've collectively done our best, but let's be very clear, the backstop is not a prerequisite for the future relationship. The way we see it is we have the transitional period up until the maximum of end of 2022. And during that time, we will see what is the future relationship between the EU and the UK, and what are additional facilitative measures we will need on the Northern Ireland border in order to do away with a hard border there, to avoid a hard border there. That is what we need to look at. So obviously, if you build, depending on what the future relationship is, the solution for the Irish border will look different. But on the basis of the current red lines of the UK, we cannot see that it is the future relationship on its own that would take care of the border. Hence the talk about, both in the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement, of a subsequent agreement. And as confirmed in the letter by Presidents Juncker and Tusk, these alternative arrangements do not have to replicate the backstop in part or in full. So we are fully open to finding different ways out during the